What is strength? The crowd mistakes the clenched fist, the raised voice, the command over others as signs of power. But these are shadows on the wall of the cave, mere echoes of a deeper reality. True strength is not the ability to impose, but the capacity to transmute one's own fire. It is the discipline of the spirit that sharpens itself against its own weakness. The strong man does not conquer the world before he has conquered the phantoms within his own soul. You, who speak of power, have you ever wrestled with your own cowardice in the stillness of night? Have you felt your heart tremble and not fled from it, but stared into its eyes until it became your servant? The strong are not born in glory, they are forged in solitude. They do not seek the crowd for applause, nor do they crawl behind masks of humility. They have tasted the bitterness of their own limitations, and instead of weeping, they have devoured it, turned it into muscle, into resolve, into fire. They are alchemists of the soul. Strength begins where excuses end. The weak search for someone to blame. The strong take up the mirror and say, "This is the enemy. This is the beginning." For what is more terrifying than the realization that no external foe is greater than the storm we harbor within? The chaos of desire, the lethargy of will, the poison of regret. These are the beasts that must be slain daily. The true warrior does not march with a banner. He marches with silence, toward his own abyss, and climbs back with scars that shine brighter than any armor. Do not look to the thrones of the world for models of power. Kings may rule over millions and still be slaves to fear, to vanity, to the opinion of worms. A man may shout across nations and yet tremble at his own reflection. Power is not volume, it is density. It is not the lightning that dazzles, but the furnace that endures. The furnace that contains itself, that does not erupt in flashes but smolders with intensity until it becomes unbreakable. To be strong is not to be without pain. It is to digest pain, to burn it for fuel. It is to let suffering strip away the superficial, to let it reveal what cannot be shaken. Suffering is the test, not the suffering imposed by others, but the suffering one chooses. The discipline one does not escape. The path one does not abandon, even when the bones cry out for rest. Weakness shrinks from the difficult. Strength feeds upon it. It says, "Give me more. Let me see what I am beneath comfort." You will know the strong not by their words, but by their bearing. They do not complain. They do not envy. They do not preach. They act. They refine themselves. They do not ask for lighter burdens, but for stronger shoulders. The weak, intoxicated by their victimhood, search for consolation. The strong do not seek to be understood. They seek to become more than they were yesterday, more sharp, more clear, more dangerous. To themselves, most of all, there are no saviors, no deliverers. The only salvation is ascent through resistance. Every temptation to stagnate must be met with rebellion. Every comfort must be interrogated. Every time the soul whispers, "Rest," the spirit must shout, "Rise!" To overcome others is sport. To overcome the self is destiny. It is the mark of those who carve their own path through the wilderness of mediocrity and do not look back for approval. They build altars to the future on the ruins of their former selves. Look not to softness, to consensus, to equality for strength. These are the refuges of those who have surrendered. True strength is unequal. It is asymmetrical. It is wild, asymptotic. It stretches toward something higher, always higher. Even as gravity and decay drag it down, it defies the fall not by denying it, but by rising in spite of it. It uses the weight of the fall as leverage. Only he who has mastered himself may command. Only he who has destroyed his falsehoods may create truth. Only he who has walked through his own hell with open eyes and did not curse the flames, but learned to dance in them, has earned the right to speak of power. And even then, he does not speak. He becomes. Morality, what a cunning invention of the frail, not born from strength, but from resentment, not sung by lions, but whispered by lambs who envy the roar. What parades through the streets as virtue is often nothing more than revenge in disguise. The weak, unable to triumph by force, dress their impotence in righteousness. They turn their lack of teeth into halos and accuse the strong of being beasts. But who are the real beasts? Those who build or those who bind? The moral man, so celebrated by the herd, does not strive for greatness, he merely obeys. He does not rise, he conforms. His goodness is not a triumph but a submission. He needs morality like the cripple needs a crutch, not to walk farther, but to conceal his limp. Do not mistake this pale face of virtue for nobility. It is cowardice baptized in doctrine. It is the refusal to climb, to struggle, to suffer, veiled as humility. The weak do not say, "Let me become stronger." No, they say, "Let us all become equal." They speak not out of love but fear. Their morals are weapons, sharp not in truth but in guilt. They cannot ascend, so they poison the heights. They praise meekness, not because they are pure, but because power terrifies them. They praise sacrifice, not because they love others, but because they resent those who dare to live for themselves. You will find their temples built on denial. Denial of instinct, denial of desire, denial of life itself. They preach that to want is sin, that to strive is arrogance, that to shine is pride. They call lust, corruption, ambition, vanity, and joy frivolity. But beneath their sermons is a trembling soul, envious of every flame it cannot endure. Morality becomes their leash, not to tame themselves, but to bind those who remind them of what they are not. In this realm, the highest is brought low, and the lowest raised up, not by merit, but by manipulation. They invert the ladder of life. The noble becomes the criminal. The daring becomes the disgraceful. The creator becomes the threat. They call it justice, but it is only leveling, flattening the peaks to make the valleys feel holy. The priests of morality are often those who could not rule their own passions, so they declared war on passion itself. And what is this war, if not the celebration of mediocrity? They make commandments, not to guide, but to imprison. They carve laws into stone, not to elevate, but to control. Thou shalt not. They cry, not to protect the soul, but to suffocate it. The strongest among us, those who burn with excess and creation, become the heretics. The statues of old gods are torn down not because they were false, but because they stood too tall. They say, "Blessed are the meek." But who blessed them? Was it heaven, or their own helplessness? They raised the beggar over the builder, the obedient over the courageous, the dying over the living. Their morality rewards suffering, not because it purifies, but because they suffer and need to believe it means something. They wrap their chains in silk and call them sacred. They make weakness divine so that their failure becomes virtue. Yet no temple built upon denial can last. No code that suffocates the will can birth greatness. The strong do not kneel before these idols of impotence. They do not ask permission to be. They do not seek forgiveness for existing fully. They know that morality, in the hands of the weak, is not a compass but a cage. It points not to the stars, but back to the flock. Morality, when it flows from power, is creation. It births new values, new heights, new forms of life. But when it seeps from weakness, it festers. It becomes dogma. It becomes decay. The herd clings to it not because it leads them, but because it allows them to sleep. They cannot face the terror of freedom, of responsibility, of standing naked before existence. So they wrap themselves in commandments and call it purpose. The weak are not evil. They are afraid, and their fear becomes gospel. They cannot destroy the strong through battle, so they do it through shame. They whisper into the ears of children that fire burns and must be feared. They rewrite stories so that heroes are proud and punished, while the timid inherit the world. But what kind of world is that? A pasture, not a kingdom. A graveyard, not a garden. A place where the wolves have been drugged, and the sheep elect their shepherd. Comfort is the opiate of the declining soul. It is the velvet coffin of vitality, the subtle assassin of all that might become great. The world praises ease and security, but the spirit with flame in its marrow spits upon such praise. Strength is not born in comfort. Strength spits upon comfort. Strength is the will that stretches itself beyond its own limits. It is the thirst for ascent, even when the air thins and the winds scream. It is the refusal to settle, the rebellion against stillness, the sacred restlessness of becoming more. He who is content has already begun to die. Contentment is the resignation of the will. It is the sigh of the defeated, the lullaby sung to lull the soul back to sleep. Do not mistake the calm face of the contented man for peace. It is stagnation. It is decay smiling behind a mask. The strong do not seek peace, they seek intensity. They do not desire still waters but stormy seas, for it is only in resistance that they know themselves. Strength is not safety. It is danger embraced and transformed. It is to walk willingly into the unknown, to court risk, to laugh in the face of uncertainty and say, "Let me see what I am made of." The weak speak of guarantees, of insurance, of protection. They build walls and call it wisdom. But the strong know that nothing worth attaining is found within walls. Greatness lives in the wilderness, in the extremes, in the edge where the world ends and the abyss begins. The will to power is not the will to dominate others. That is a child's misunderstanding of force. The will to power is the will to elevate, to transcend, to impose form upon chaos. Not out there, but within. It is the inner fire that refuses to dim. It is the hunger to grow sharp, to refine, to intensify one's being to the point of unbearable clarity. It is not the will to rest, but the will to become, and what one becomes is not given. It is forged, violently, against resistance. The comfort seekers pray for ease. The power seeker prays for obstacles. For what is a man without resistance? A balloon adrift, a leaf, a shadow. It is only in the presence of resistance that the self becomes solid. Comfort removes the sculptor's hammer. It dulls the edge. It removes the fire that tempers the blade. Those who live for comfort become soft in spirit, flabby in vision, dull in instinct. They lose the tension that makes life vibrant. They forget the joy of the climb and settle for the warmth of the base. The strong are not comfortable, and they do not wish to be. They are fevered with becoming. The will to power burns through them like a sun that never sets. They devour hardship. They turn wounds into wisdom. They bleed and call it sacrifice, not tragedy. They are not addicted to pleasure, nor do they fear pain. They use both. Pleasure is a reward for conquest, not a goal in itself. Pain is a crucible, not a curse. Both are tools, materials in the hands of a master, shaper of self. To pursue comfort is to betray the will. It is to choose sleep over wakefulness, routine over adventure, the known over the possible. But life, true life, is found only at the edge of the possible. It is not something to be preserved. It is something to be risked. It must be wagered, thrown into the fire, if it is to reveal its gold. The weak hoard their time, their energy, their affections. The strong spend them like a storm, knowing that only through expenditure does one rise. Strength is not possession. It is becoming, not arrival, but motion. The will to power does not ask for permission. It does not negotiate with comfort. It destroys what it has outgrown and begins again. It is a spiral, never a circle. The weak crave routine because it saves them from having to make choices. But the strong love the freedom of choice, even when it costs them everything. They choose danger over habit, creation over repetition, and they never look back with regret. Comfort is a trap disguised as reward. It is the slow death of those who feared to live fully. It comes dressed in kindness, but carries a blade. The man who chooses comfort ceases to be a creator. He becomes a consumer, a spectator, a relic of what might have been. But the man who follows the will to power is not satisfied by what is. He is the eternal discontent, the divine malcontent, the artist who carves himself into something more than man. There is a breed of spirit that cannot create, cannot build, cannot dance in the light of its own becoming. It cannot rise, and so it burrows. It does not sculpt truth but scratches bitterness into the walls of its cage. This spirit, too weak to wield a sword, forges instead a poison, resentment. Resentment is the revenge of the impotent, the scream of those who lack the strength to transform their suffering into anything other than accusation. They do not challenge the strong directly, they gnaw at them in the shadows. The powerless do not forget, they ferment. Every failure, every humiliation, every glimpse of someone brighter or bolder than themselves becomes a wound they nurse in secret. But not to heal, never to heal. They cultivate the wound as identity, as moral high ground, as justification for their hatred. Where the strong man moves forward, forgetting the arrow in his side, the resentful man frames the arrow and calls it virtue. He says, "Look what was done to me," and gathers disciples who see in his wound their own weakness reflected. Resentment does not act, it reacts. It has no light of its own, no fire. It mirrors the strong only to twist them. The resentful soul cannot stand the radiance of greatness, so it must dim the light. It cannot kill the eagle, so it teaches that flying is arrogant. It cannot become beautiful, so it teaches that beauty is vanity. It cannot be bold, so it preaches that boldness is cruelty. This is the essence of inversion, not the creation of new values, but the sabotage of existing ones. Look to history and see the great monuments that resentment has tried to topple. Not with force, but with slander. Not with strength, but with reinterpretation. The hero becomes the tyrant. The genius becomes the madman. The lover of life becomes the selfish hedonist. They cannot outshine you, so they throw mud. And when it sticks, they claim you were dirty all along. Their greatest triumph is not victory, but the corruption of what is above them, until it no longer shines at all. The resentful speak of justice, but it is not justice they seek. It is reversal. Not the elevation of themselves, but the humiliation of others. They do not desire to rise. They desire to pull down. Their justice is envy in disguise, cloaked in moral language. They demand equality, not because they believe all are equal, but because they cannot tolerate that some are more. They speak of the common good, but what they truly mean is, no one shall rise above me. What is weakness with a voice? It is dogma. It is ideology. It is the mob. The weak alone are harmless, but when gathered and given a doctrine, they become a flood that drowns all distinction. They use pity as a weapon. They praise suffering because it is the only currency they possess. They crown the most broken among them as kings of conscience. And they teach the young not to admire strength, but to suspect it, to question it, to fear it. They are not builders of civilization, but termites in its beams. They do not plant, but rot. And worst of all, they call this rot compassion. They call this decay progress. The man of resentment does not look to the stars, he looks to his neighbor, and if his neighbor has climbed one rung higher, he sharpens his knife. He would rather the ladder be destroyed than anyone climb higher than he dares. He dreams of a world in which greatness is impossible, where nothing wounds his pride, because nothing shines brighter than his shadow. Resentment is not power, it is parasitism. It latches onto the strong and feeds on their vitality while cursing them for being alive. It has no direction, only reflex, no creation, only sabotage, and yet it multiplies. It breeds in the cracks of decaying cultures, in the soft beds of declining empires. When the will to power fades, when strength is condemned and comfort sanctified, resentment blooms like a weed. It does not build temples but burns them. It does not write symphonies but mocks them. It does not ascend the mountain but poisons the spring. And when the last fire of ambition is snuffed out, when the last statue is torn down and no one dares speak above a whisper, the resentful will smile, not out of joy, but out of spite, for they have finally dragged the world to the only level they could tolerate their own. To affirm life is to embrace it not only in its splendor, but in its cruelty, its agony, its chaos. Only the strong are capable of such an affirmation. The weak endure life. The strong say yes to it. Wholly, without reservation, without apology. Not merely when it smiles, but when it bares its teeth. They do not ask for the world to be just, for suffering to end, for the universe to bow to their wishes. They accept the storm, the fire, the wound, and say this too is part of the dance. The herd recoils from pain, from loss, from death. They see these as errors, violations of some imagined harmony. But life is not a gentle stream, it is a wild ocean with no shore. It swells and crashes, builds and destroys, loves and devours. The strong do not curse this truth, they drink it. They stare into the black sun of suffering and do not blink. They let it scar them, and from those scars they carve deeper strength. The wound is not the end, it is the threshold. What is suffering, if not the fire that tests the soul's integrity? It strips away illusion, tears off the masks of convenience. It shows a man what he is made of. No, more than that, it gives him the chance to make something of himself. In the crucible of anguish, the weak dissolve into bitterness or flee into distraction. But the strong are forged. They do not cry for rescue. They cry for revelation. They know that each moment of pain is a hammer blow. If they can endure it, it shapes them. There is no beauty without suffering. no triumph without risk, no ecstasy without vulnerability. The joy of the strong is not in the absence of pain, but in its transformation. They know the alchemy of turning despair into defiance, fear into fire. They do not flee the fall, they make it part of their rise. Even when they are broken, they choose how to break. They preserve their dignity amid disaster. They do not beg the heavens for mercy. They become their own gods. The weak think strength means not suffering. The strong know strength is suffering consciously, with open eyes, with clenched teeth and a grin. They walk through hell not to escape it, but to understand it. They take every scream and make it into a song, every failure into a step, every betrayal into a deeper solitude in which they find their own voice. They are not hardened by suffering. They are awakened by it. To affirm life is to say yes to the whole of it, to madness and melody, to love and loneliness, to gain and decay. The strong do not pick joy and call it life. They embrace contradiction. They see beauty in the tragic, in the fleeting, in the imperfect. They kiss the transient. They do not demand permanence. They exult in becoming. Life is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be danced. And only those who have bled can dance without shame. The weak cry out, "Why me?" The strong answer, "Why not me?" The weak pray for meaning to descend from heaven. The strong create meaning from the dust of collapse. They sculpt values from void, erect altars in the aftermath of earthquakes. They write their gospel not in words, but in choices, brutal, radiant choices made in the face of the abyss. They are not immune to despair. They simply do not allow despair to define them. Suffering is inevitable. This is not a curse, but a condition of life's intensity. Only a dull world is painless. But who would want a painless world? Who would wish to be numb when they could burn? The strong say, "Give me the full spectrum. Give me the night so I may see the stars. Give me the fall so I may test the climb. Give me the silence so I may learn the weight of my own voice." They do not seek to eliminate suffering. They seek to earn it. In the end, strength is not the absence of wounds, but the refusal to be undone by them. The strong are those who carry their suffering as one carries a sacred burden, not with shame but with reverence. They are not martyrs, but warriors of becoming. They do not seek an easy life. They seek a worthy one. And they know that worth is born not in comfort, but in confrontation, not in peace, but in struggle, not in safety, but in the wild ecstasy of saying yes to life, even when it roars. So ask yourself, not in whispers, but in a voice that echoes within, are you strong or are you weak? Not by the weight you lift or the titles you wear, but by the fire you carry when the world turns cold. Strength is not in domination, not in applause, not in comfort. It is in the courage to affirm life without illusion, to suffer without retreat, to rise without resentment, to create without permission, and to stand alone if you must, burning with the will to become. The strong carve their path through chaos, not seeking to escape the storm, but to harness it. They do not disguise envy as morality, nor beg for equality as a mask for fear. They bear their scars openly, their solitude with pride, and their suffering as proof that they dared to live. To be strong is to accept life in its totality and still declare, "I choose this. I will shape this. I will not bow. This is the measure. This is the mirror. Break it if you must, but only if you dare to build something stronger from the shards."